The gravel crunched beneath the tires as the old Subaru pulled up the narrow dirt driveway, framed on both sides by towering sycamore trees and the early autumn gold of Tennessee's countryside. It had been almost a year since Daniel Carter last stepped foot on the porch of the Whitmore family home, a modest, two-story wooden house nestled beside a gentle bend in the Harpeth River. Daniel cut the engine. Emily, seated beside him, was busy unbuckling their 4-year-old son, Noah, from his car seat. The child squirmed impatiently, eager to be released. Daniel stepped out first, stretching his back and glancing toward the house. The screen door creaked open. There she was, Margaret Whitmore, standing in the doorway with her apron still tied around her waist, flour on her hands, and the same serene expression she always wore. Her gray hair was pulled back into a loose bun, and her eyes, sharp, sea-glass green, met Daniel's for a moment too long before flicking to her daughter and grandson. "Well, would you look at that?" Margaret called, stepping forward. "My babies are home." Noah ran into her arms. Emily followed, laughing, while Daniel took his time walking up the steps, nodding politely. The house smelled of something sweet, peach cobbler, maybe, and the wooden floors still creaked in all the same places. Margaret had barely changed a thing since her husband passed 6 years ago. Photos lined the hallway, all of them sepia-toned with time. Daniel's own wedding photo sat on a shelf in the living room, surrounded by smiling faces and a young version of himself, eyes brighter than they were now. As the day waned, they shared a hearty dinner at the large oak table by the window. The sun dipped below the hills, casting a warm orange hue across the room. Noah dozed off on the couch after dinner, his belly full and his cheeks rosy. Emily volunteered to put him to bed, disappearing upstairs. Daniel helped Margaret clear the dishes. They moved with a quiet rhythm, her washing, him drying. It was comfortable, almost too comfortable. "You've lost weight," she said, not looking at him. Daniel blinked. "Yeah, long hours at the firm. Not much time to eat. You look tired." He didn't answer. They finished cleaning, and Margaret made tea. They took their cups onto the front porch where the night air had cooled, and the cicadas had begun their evening songs. The river beyond the field shimmered under the moonlight, its slow movement like a silent lullaby. Margaret sat on the old wooden swing, Daniel beside her in one of the wicker chairs. For a while, neither spoke. "Emily tells me work's been hard on you," Margaret said gently, cradling her mug. Daniel sighed, running a hand through his short dark hair. "Yeah, it's been a lot lately. Deadlines, pressure. Feels like I never see my own kid anymore. She says you've been distant." He looked over at her, caught off guard. "She worries," Margaret added quickly. "That's all." He exhaled, resting his elbows on his knees. "She's not wrong." The silence returned. Somewhere down by the river, an owl called out. Daniel found himself staring at Margaret, her profile lit by the soft porch light, the delicate lines around her mouth, the way her hands gripped the mug tightly, as if to keep them from shaking. "Do you ever get lonely out here?" he asked. Margaret turned to him, slowly. "Lonely," she smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Sometimes, but it's a peaceful kind of lonely. The kind you choose, not the kind forced on you." He nodded, understanding more than he cared to admit. Later that night, Daniel lay in the guest room, staring at the ceiling. Emily was curled up beside him, asleep. The sheets smelled faintly of lavender and the past. The wind rustled through the trees outside. But Daniel's mind was elsewhere, on the porch, on the way Margaret had looked at him when she thought he wasn't noticing. He told himself it was just exhaustion, just nerves from the job, the lack of sleep, the weight of responsibility. But as the minutes turned into hours and sleep refused to come, he realized something was shifting. Something subtle, dangerous. The next morning, life resumed its ordinary pace. Margaret made pancakes for Noah, who devoured them with syrup-smeared enthusiasm. Emily chatted with her mother in the kitchen about local church events and old friends. Daniel excused himself for a walk. He wandered along the river, hands in his pockets, the air crisp with early fall. The water moved slowly beside him, reflecting the sky. He remembered the first time he'd come here with Emily, how nervous he'd been to meet her parents, how kindly Margaret had received him even though he was older and not what they'd expected. Back then, Margaret had seemed unshakable. Now, she felt like something fragile wrapped in quiet strength. He didn't know when it began. The realization that he noticed the curve of her neck, the way her laughter lingered longer than it should have in his mind. It made him feel sick. Wrong. But it was there, and denying it didn't make it go away. That evening, while Emily bathed Noah upstairs, Daniel found himself alone with Margaret again. She was tending to the small herb garden behind the house, plucking sprigs of thyme and rosemary. "Need help?" he asked. She looked up, surprised, then nodded. "Sure. Hand me the basket." They worked in silence, side by side. Their hands brushed once. Accidentally, they told themselves, but neither of them pulled away quickly enough. Daniel felt a strange electricity in that fleeting contact, like something forbidden had whispered through the touch. Margaret straightened up, brushing dirt from her hands. "This is wrong," she said quietly. Daniel froze. "I didn't say anything. You didn't have to." He stepped back, guilt tightening around his chest. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean." "I know." They stood there, the garden between them, the sun setting behind the hills like a curtain falling on something sacred. Margaret picked up the basket and walked past him, back toward the house. That night, they avoided each other. Daniel didn't sleep. The river outside continued its slow journey, as if indifferent to the storm quietly gathering within the walls of that old wooden house. Daniel returned to Nashville the next day with Emily and Noah, the long drive back unusually quiet. Emily chatted occasionally about things they should do that weekend: the pumpkin patch, grocery shopping, maybe a movie night, but her voice sounded distant to Daniel, like it was coming through a tunnel. He answered when needed, but mostly he kept his eyes on the road, both hands tied on the wheel. Margaret hadn't said goodbye at the car. She'd stood on the porch with Noah in her arms, then handed him over to Emily and disappeared back into the house without another word. There was no awkward hug, no lingering glance, just absence. But Daniel could still feel her presence like a phantom in the passenger seat beside him. That night, after putting Noah to bed, Daniel stood on the balcony of their apartment, staring at the city lights below. Nashville hummed around him. Sirens, car horns, televisions through open windows. Yet none of it reached him. His mind was back in Tennessee, standing beside the herb garden, hearing her say, "This is wrong," in a voice that cracked like glass under pressure. The days that followed were suffocating. Daniel poured himself into work, staying later than usual, volunteering for the most tedious tasks just to avoid going home. At night, he lay in bed beside Emily, her body curled into his like it always was, and stared at the ceiling until sleep finally stole him away. He dreamed of rivers and porch swings and eyes the color of sea glass. 2 weeks passed before he heard from Margaret again. The message was simple. "The roof's leaking again. Could use a hand if you're free this weekend." Daniel stared at the text for a long time. There were a dozen people she could have called in town. A handyman, a neighbor. She had never reached out to him directly before, not like this. He knew what it meant, or at least what it could mean. He waited a full hour before replying. "I'll drive down Saturday. Just for the day." Emily didn't question it when he told her. She looked mildly annoyed. Noah had a soccer clinic he would miss, but she shrugged it off. "Your mom needs you," she said, mistaking Margaret's request as a call from Daniel's own mother. He didn't correct her. Saturday came with a gray sky and the smell of impending rain. Daniel drove in silence again, windows up, radio off, as if the drive itself was part of some ritual he couldn't admit to. The trees had started to shed their leaves in earnest, lining the road with gold and rust. The world felt heavier somehow, slower. Margaret opened the door before he knocked. "I didn't think you'd come," she said, stepping aside. "I said I would." The tension between them was palpable. Neither smiled. The house was just as he'd left it. Warm, familiar, too quiet. Daniel followed her up the stairs to the attic where the leak had stained one corner of the ceiling. They worked side by side in silence, prying up old shingles, replacing damp insulation, hammering new nails into old wood. Occasionally their hands would brush, their arms would press too close, and each time they'd pause, but say nothing. The silence wasn't empty. It was loaded, buzzing with all the words they refused to say. By the time the work was done, the rain had started. Margaret made coffee, and they sat once more on the porch, watching the drops dance along the riverbank. "This can't keep happening," Daniel said, finally. "No," she agreed. "It can't." But neither moved. He looked over at her. She was wearing a flannel shirt and jeans, her hair tied back like before. Rain misted her cheeks, and he had the sudden, desperate urge to reach out and wipe it away. To touch her again, even just her hand. "I think about you," he admitted, the words falling out like loose nails. "More than I should." Margaret didn't look at him. "I know. I'm married to your daughter. I know that too. She loves me. I'm sure she does." There was a long pause. "I loved my husband," Margaret said suddenly. "Deeply. But toward the end, it felt like I was living next to a memory. Not a man. Just the echo of something that used to be real." Daniel didn't speak. He understood too well. "Emily's a good woman," she continued. "She deserves better than lies. She deserves a husband who doesn't look at her mother like he's drowning, and I'm the only shore." "I didn't come here for this," Daniel said, though even as he said it, he wasn't sure what this meant anymore. "Didn't you?" Margaret turned to him, eyes sharp, searching. "Then why are you here, Daniel?" He opened his mouth, closed it again. He didn't have an answer. Margaret stood abruptly. "You should go before the rain gets worse." He didn't move. The rain was falling harder now, thick drops bouncing off the porch roof. "Daniel," she said firmly. "Please." Finally, he stood. He walked to the door, hesitated, then turned back. "If I asked you to leave with me, right now, what would you say?" Margaret's face crumpled with something like sorrow, or anger, or maybe just exhaustion. "I'd say no. Because if we leave, we never stop running." Daniel stared at her for a long moment, then nodded. He walked out into the rain without another word. Driving home, the road blurred in front of him. The windshield wipers struggled to keep up. He told himself he had done the right thing. That walking away meant something. But deep down, he knew he hadn't walked away. He had only pressed pause. Somewhere inside him, something dangerous was still waiting, still watching the river from a distance, still wondering what would happen if he dared to cross it. 3 weeks passed. Daniel didn't return to Margaret's house, but she never left his mind. Her absence filled the quiet spaces of his life like fog. He went to work, kissed his son goodnight, pretended with Emily. But the river was always there in the background, pulling at him like a current. He told himself he had done the right thing by leaving, that he had drawn a line, that they both had. But lines drawn in sand do not survive the tide, and Daniel knew the tide was rising. It was a Friday night when the first lie was spoken aloud. Emily sat across from him at the dinner table, swirling a fork in her untouched spaghetti. Noah had already eaten and was playing with toy trucks in the living room. "We haven't been close lately," she said, not looking up. Daniel felt the words before she spoke them. He had seen the signs, her quiet glances, her pauses before speaking, the way she reached for him in bed only to stop herself. "I know," he said softly. Emily finally met his eyes. "Are you seeing someone?" The question hit him like a slap. He hadn't expected her to ask so directly. "No," he said, and it wasn't technically a lie. "Not yet." Emily studied him for a long moment. "Okay." She didn't believe him, not fully, but she didn't press. She stood, gathered the plates, and carried them to the sink without another word. Daniel watched her back as she moved, and for the first time in weeks, he felt something like shame. But not enough to stop what would happen next. The second lie came that Sunday. He told Emily he had to visit a project site near Franklin, a 2-hour drive. She offered to come with him, but he insisted it would be boring, all technical walkthroughs and meetings with engineers. She gave a half-hearted smile, kissed him goodbye, and went back to folding laundry. He drove straight to Margaret's. It was raining again, light and steady, as if the weather itself refused to let go of what had begun. Margaret opened the door without surprise. "I thought you wouldn't come back," she said. "I thought I wouldn't either." She stepped aside, and he entered. The house smelled like wood polish and cinnamon. There was a fire burning in the hearth, soft music playing from an old radio. Everything felt too intimate, too deliberate. Neither of them spoke for a while. Daniel stood by the window, watching the raindrops trace paths down the glass. Margaret sat on the arm of the couch, her hands clasped together in her lap. Finally, she said, "Why are you here, Daniel?" He turned to her, but the words came slowly. "I don't know." "Yes, you do." He nodded. "Because I can't stop thinking about you. Because everything feels quieter when I'm near you. Because I'm losing myself, and somehow, you're the only place I feel like I still exist." She stood then, slowly, like she didn't quite trust her legs. "You know this is wrong," she said. "I know. And we'll never come back from it. I know." Margaret's eyes filled with something that might have been longing, or fear, or both. She took one step toward him, then another. When their hands met, There was no resistance, just a quiet surrender. The kiss was soft at first, hesitant, searching, but quickly deepened into something more desperate. Years of loneliness, regret, and buried desire unraveled between them in a single breath. Neither of them spoke. There were no explanations, no excuses, just skin against skin, grief against grief. Afterward, they lay tangled on the old couch, the fire crackling beside them, the room thick with the scent of rain and ash and sweat. Daniel ran a hand down her back, marveling at the strange intimacy of the moment. How familiar and unfamiliar it felt at once. Margaret stared at the ceiling, her chest rising and falling in slow, heavy breaths. "I hated you for coming back," she whispered. "I hated myself for wanting to." She turned her face toward him. "Do you still?" He didn't answer. The silence said enough. When Daniel returned home that night, he showered twice and changed into clean clothes before walking through the front door. Emily was already in bed, reading. She looked up briefly, offered a small smile, then returned to her book. Daniel lay beside her in the dark, listening to her breathing. He had never felt farther away from her than he did in that moment. The next morning, he told the third lie. Emily made coffee while Noah played at the kitchen table. "How was the sight?" she asked. He took the mug from her hand. "Routine. Nothing special." She nodded, then paused. "You smell like smoke." Daniel froze, then forced a laugh. One of the supervisors lit a fire in an old burned barrel outside. Said it helped him think. Emily laughed softly. Men and their rituals. He laughed with her. The lie slipped between them like fog, unnoticed but damp and real. Weeks passed. The affair did not fade. It deepened. Daniel found reasons to return to the town, errands, visits, repairs. Margaret no longer pretended to resist. They didn't talk about Emily. They didn't talk about consequences. What they had was a secret world carved out of shame and longing, and they both clung to it like survivors on a raft. But nothing built on silence stays upright forever. One evening, after they had made love and were lying in bed, Margaret whispered, "What happens when this ends?" Daniel stared at the ceiling. "Does it have to?" "Yes," she said. "It always does." He reached for her hand. "I don't want it to." She didn't pull away, but she didn't hold on either. The cold crept in early that year. Tennessee autumns were usually forgiving, but this one turned sharp and brittle without warning, like something had cracked in the sky. The leaves browned too quickly, the wind bit too deeply, and in the quiet corners of their lives, both Daniel and Margaret began to feel it, the slow tightening of something coming undone. What had started in silence was now weighed down by it. Daniel was no longer pretending to be okay. He was going through the motions, work, family dinners, bedtime stories, but his eyes were elsewhere, his body present, but his mind adrift. Emily noticed, but said nothing. It was the sort of silence people carry when they are afraid that speaking will shatter what's left. One Saturday morning, as he adjusted Noah's jacket before sending him off with Emily to a playdate, Emily lingered at the door. "You're different lately," she said, softly. Daniel looked at her, forcing a smile. "Just tired. Is it still just work?" He hesitated. "Yeah, it's just work." Emily didn't respond right away. She stared at him, like she was trying to read something written beneath his skin. "If it's more than that, you can tell me." He met her eyes then, and for a fleeting second, he almost did. The weight of everything pressed against his chest, but the words remained buried. He kissed her forehead instead and said, "I'm okay." She nodded, then left with Noah. The door clicked shut behind them. The silence that followed felt like judgment. Later that afternoon, Daniel found himself driving without destination, the steering wheel guiding him through memory instead of geography. He didn't call ahead. He didn't need to. When he pulled into the gravel driveway, Margaret was already on the porch. "You always show up when the leaves start falling," she said, arms folded. "Maybe I just like the way they sound under my feet." She didn't smile. Inside, the house was warm. She had lit the fireplace, but the room felt heavy, as though the flames could no longer burn through what had accumulated between them. They sat across from each other, not touching. "I think Emily knows," Daniel said finally. Margaret looked away. "She should. Do you want her to?" "No, but I can't blame her if she does. Women know when they're being erased." Daniel flinched at the word. "That's not what I'm doing." "Isn't it?" she asked. "You erase her every time you come here." The word sat between them, raw and bloodied. I didn't plan for this, he said. Neither did I. She stood and walked to the window. Outside, the wind blew through the trees, sending leaves skittering across the lawn like startled birds. I used to think grief was the heaviest thing a person could carry, she said. But this is different. This kind of weight makes you look in the mirror and not recognize the person looking back. Daniel rose, walked over to her. I don't regret you. She turned to him sharply. Then you haven't let yourself feel the full truth of it yet. He reached for her, and this time, she didn't step away. Their bodies came together like magnets, desperate and full of ache. But even as they touched, something had shifted. The urgency wasn't desire, it was fear. Fear that this would be the last time. Fear that the walls were closing in. Afterward, they lay tangled in the sheets, not speaking. The light filtering through the curtains was pale and distant. Margaret whispered, "What if this ruins everything?" Daniel stared at the ceiling. "Hasn't it already?" She didn't reply. They both knew what came next, even if they hadn't said it. Secrets don't stay buried forever. Affairs don't linger in the quiet without eventually becoming loud. The next morning, as Daniel buttoned his shirt, Margaret handed him a small envelope. "What's this?" he asked. "Something I wrote. For myself. Don't read it now." He took it hesitantly. She watched him for a long moment. "You should go." He didn't argue. He drove home through the same winding roads. But this time they felt unfamiliar, as though some border had been crossed, and there was no map to lead him back. At home, Emily was in the kitchen, humming to herself. Noah was napping on the couch, a soft blanket tucked under his chin. Daniel kissed her cheek. She turned to him, surprised. "You're in a good mood." He smiled. "Just glad to be home." That night, while Emily slept beside him, Daniel opened the envelope. Inside was a short note, handwritten in blue ink. "Daniel, you keep asking what this is. What we are. Here's my answer. We are grief in the shape of love. We are love in the shape of guilt. We are what shouldn't have happened. And yet here we are. I can't carry both you and my daughter. I won't choose. But I know, eventually, the choice will be made for us. M." Daniel read it twice, then folded it carefully and slid it into the drawer beside his bed. He didn't sleep. The days that followed were quieter still. Emily began to talk less. Noah asked more questions. Margaret didn't call. One evening, Emily sat across from him at dinner and said, "Noah drew a picture at school today. He said it was you, me, and a baby girl." Daniel's heart stuttered. "A baby girl?" Emily nodded. "He says she's coming soon. Some imaginary sister, I guess." Daniel forced a chuckle. Kids and their fantasies. Emily watched him for a moment longer, then looked away. And in that moment, Daniel realized something. The weight he'd been carrying wasn't just guilt. It was inevitability. What they had begun was no longer just about what they felt. It was now about what they had done. And what would happen next was no longer theirs to control. Margaret Whitmore stood barefoot in her bathroom, staring at the small plastic stick in her hand. Outside, the trees groaned under the weight of the wind, their skeletal branches scratching against the window pane. The house was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator and the ticking of the clock in the hallway. 2 pink lines. For a moment, she thought she must be hallucinating. She was 52 years old. The idea was absurd. Impossible, even. But the room didn't move, the test didn't change, and the lines didn't fade. She sat down on the edge of the tub, the stick still trembling in her hand. Pregnant. With Daniel's child. She tried to breathe. In through the nose, out through the mouth, like she'd done during labor 3 decades ago. But this time, it wasn't pain in her body she was preparing for. It was the unraveling of everything. She had known something was different for weeks. Fatigue, nausea in the mornings, the familiar swelling in her breasts. But she had dismissed it as menopause, as stress, as the weight of what they had done pressing into her bones. Now there was no denying it. She didn't cry. Margaret Whitmore didn't cry anymore. Not since her husband passed. Not since the world had taught her that tears solved nothing. Instead, she stood, walked calmly to the kitchen, made herself tea. Then she sat at the table with a yellow legal pad and began to write. She didn't write to Daniel. She wrote to the baby. By the time she finished, it was past midnight. The tea had gone cold. Her hands were still shaking. The next morning, she called Daniel. "I need to see you," she said. His voice, tight with concern, replied immediately. "Is everything okay?" "No. Come alone." When he arrived, she didn't speak right away. She led him to the back porch, where they had so often sat in silence. This time, there was no silence. "I'm pregnant," she said. Daniel didn't react at first. It was as if the words hadn't landed. Then his face went pale. His mouth opened, closed, then opened again. "What? I'm pregnant," she repeated. He sat down hard on the porch swing. "No, no, that's not possible. You're I know how old I am, Daniel," she snapped. "I know what this is." He ran a hand through his hair, staring out at the river. It moved slowly, a wide band of gray beneath a dull sky. For once, it offered no comfort. "How far along?" he asked finally. "Almost 10 weeks." Daniel buried his face in his hands. Jesus. She didn't reach for him. "I didn't tell you to force a decision," she said. "I just thought you had a right to know." "A right," he echoed bitterly. "Do I even have any rights anymore?" She didn't answer. They sat like that for a long time. Finally, Daniel stood. "What are you going to do?" he asked. "I haven't decided." "Margaret." He looked at her then, really looked at her. "This will destroy everything." "I know." He nodded slowly. "Then why don't I feel surprised?" That night, back in Nashville, Daniel sat in his car for almost an hour before walking into the apartment. Emily was asleep on the couch, Noah curled beside her. The soft hum of a late-night commercial played on mute. Daniel watched them for a while, something inside him unraveling. He wanted to confess, to tell her everything, but the words wouldn't come. He wasn't sure they ever would. The following week, Margaret called again. "I've made a decision." Daniel didn't breathe. "I'm keeping the baby." His chest tightened. "Margaret, I'm not asking for anything. Not support. Not money. Not involvement. You think it's that simple?" "It's not simple," she said. "It's honest. That's more than we've been." "What are you going to tell people?" "I'll say I found the baby. That she was left on my porch." Small towns love stories like that. Daniel let out a bitter laugh. "You think they'll believe you?" "They'll believe what they want to believe." "And what about Emily?" "I'll figure that out." There was a pause. "She'll know, eventually," Daniel said. "It's not just your face that child might wear." "I know." Daniel pressed the phone tighter to his ear. "Do you hate me for this?" "No," she said softly. "But I wish I'd never let you through the door." After that call, they didn't speak for several weeks. Margaret followed through with her plan. She began making subtle preparations, ordering baby supplies online, slowly converting the guest room into a nursery. She said nothing to her neighbors, not yet. She didn't want questions until she had answers. In the meantime, she crafted her story. On a rainy October night, she left the front light on. She placed a small basket on the porch, a thrifted one, lined with soft blankets, and tucked in a note written in block letters. "Her name is Grace. Please take care of her." Then she called the sheriff's department from a pay phone 2 towns over. By the time they arrived, she was sitting on the porch swing, a thin blanket over her lap, the found baby cradled in her arms. The story hit the local paper within days. Retired widow discovers abandoned infant on her porch. It made the rounds on social media. Margaret was hailed as a local hero. Donations came in. Church women offered casseroles and crib sheets. She smiled politely, thanked them, and held Grace close. Daniel read the article online. He stared at the photo of Margaret holding the baby, standing in the same doorway where they had once kissed. Her face was unreadable. Emily shared the story over breakfast, scrolling through her phone. "Can you believe this?" she said. "It happened right in your mom's town." Daniel pretended to look, heart pounding. "Yeah, crazy." Emily frowned. "She kind of looks like someone I know." Daniel froze. Emily blinked. "Never mind. Probably nothing." But something had shifted. A thread had been pulled, and the rest of the fabric would soon begin to unravel. The town of Fairview was the kind of place where secrets didn't last long, not because people were unkind, but because they noticed everything. A new car in someone's driveway sparked conversation at the diner. A haircut prompted theories. An abandoned baby on the porch of Margaret Whitmore's house? That was a story that wouldn't go away easily. At first, everyone accepted it as a miracle. A child left behind in a quiet neighborhood. No cameras, no witnesses. No footprints in the mud except Margaret's. The sheriff looked into it, of course. They checked hospitals, churches, even interstate security footage. Nothing. No birth records. No missing person reports. Just a baby with no name. Until Margaret gave her one. Grace. The name stuck like it was meant to. People brought diapers, blankets, toys. They offered support, admiration, and whispered theories in the grocery store aisles. But admiration has a short half-life in small towns. Admiration turns to questions. Questions turn to suspicion. "She's too calm for someone who just found a baby," said Mrs. Keller, who ran the church's community board. Her story changed slightly between interviews, noted a retired teacher with too much time on her hands. Then someone asked the wrong question, or the right one, depending on the angle. "Don't you think that baby kind of looks like Daniel Carter?" The words were spoken innocently enough, over coffee at a hardware store by someone who'd seen Daniel at Margaret's house once or twice. But it spread like ivy, quiet, fast, and impossible to kill. Margaret noticed it first in the way people looked at her during Sunday service. Not accusatory, not yet, but curious, studied. She adjusted. She stopped attending the Wednesday night potlucks, politely declined book club invitations, stuck to walks along the river at dawn when no one else was around. But rumors, once lit, don't go out easily. The spark hit Nashville a few weeks later. Emily was waiting for Noah to finish preschool when she bumped into Rachel, an old classmate who still had family in Fairview. "You wouldn't believe the gossip coming out of your mom's town," Rachel said. "There's this whole story about a baby someone supposedly left on Margaret's porch." Emily blinked. "Wait, my mom." "Yeah, it's all over the Fairview Chronicle. People are obsessed. Apparently, the baby's really cute, but well, what?" Rachel leaned in. "Some folks say the baby looks a lot like Daniel." Emily laughed, but it came out awkward and high-pitched. "You're kidding." Rachel raised an eyebrow. "Hey, not my story. I'm just telling you what I heard." That night, Emily didn't say anything to Daniel. But after he went to bed, she pulled out her laptop. It didn't take long to find the article. There it was, Margaret on her porch, baby Grace in her arms, wrapped in a floral blanket. Emily stared at the photo for a long time. Grace's eyes were closed, but her features, her nose, her lips, felt eerily familiar. Not just Daniel. Her, too. Something about the shape of the baby's chin, the slight curl of the hair. She told herself it was coincidence. People saw patterns where they wanted to. But still, something sat uneasily in her stomach. She began clicking through more photos online. Other angles. Interviews. A local TV spot. She paused on a still frame. Margaret smiling, baby Grace in her lap. The child looked no more than a month old. Margaret's arms around her looked too natural, too practiced. And Margaret was glowing. Not in the way someone might glow with joy. In the way a new mother glows. Emily closed the laptop. For a week, she said nothing. But she watched Daniel more closely. How he reacted when Noah mentioned Grace's name, he didn't. How he looked when Fairview came up in conversation, he changed the subject. She saw it now, clear as glass. He was hiding something. Then came the envelope. It arrived in the mail, addressed in Margaret's handwriting. No return address. Inside was a photo of Grace. A short note. "She's healthy. Happy. Growing fast. Just thought you should know." Emily sat with the letter for a long time. It wasn't addressed to her. It didn't need to be. She waited until Daniel came home from work and handed it to him without a word. He read it, expression locked. Then he looked at her. "Why is she writing to you?" Emily asked. "She isn't," he said. "That wasn't meant for you." "But it came here," she said. Daniel opened his mouth, then closed it. Emily felt the ground shift beneath her. "Tell me the truth." He looked at the letter again. "It's not what you think." "No." She laughed, bitter and breathless. "Because I think you cheated on me. With my mother. And that baby in the photo, she's yours." The silence was confirmation. Emily stood, backing away. "Jesus, Daniel." He didn't try to stop her. Didn't deny it. Emily turned toward the hallway, then paused. "How long?" Daniel hesitated. "It started last summer." "My God," she whispered. She walked into the bedroom and closed the door behind her. For the rest of the night, the house was silent, except for Noah's soft breathing in the next room and the sound of Grace's name echoing in Emily's mind. Back in Fairview, Margaret sat in the nursery, rocking Grace slowly. The lights were low. A soft lullaby played from an old radio. She didn't know if Daniel had received the letter. She didn't know if Emily had opened it. But part of her hoped she had. It was time. She wasn't proud of what she'd done. But shame and love often coexist in the same heartbeat. She looked down at Grace's sleeping face. Peaceful, trusting, untouched by the choices of adults. "I won't let them hurt you," she whispered. "No matter what happens next." The wind outside picked up again, shaking the windows, rustling the leaves that had begun to fall harder now. Storms were coming, and no one, not Margaret, not Daniel, not Emily, could avoid getting wet. Emily didn't cry. She thought she might, but instead, she moved through the next 2 days in eerie calm, feeding Noah, getting him to school, replying to work emails, making dinner, cleaning up. Daniel tried to talk to her once, but she shut it down with a single glance. It wasn't anger, not yet. It was something colder, something more dangerous. On the third morning, she called her mother. Margaret picked up on the second ring. "Emily, I'm coming down this afternoon," Emily said. There was a pause. "All right. I don't want excuses. I don't want you to pretend. I just want the truth." Another pause. "Then you'll get it." Emily hung up without saying goodbye. She didn't tell Daniel she was going. She left Noah with a sitter, packed an overnight bag, and got on the road before noon. The highway stretched out ahead of her, but her mind was behind her, playing and replaying the moments she'd dismissed. Daniel's disappearances, her mother's evasive answers, the look in both their eyes whenever Grace's name came up. She gripped the wheel harder. The trees blurred past, gold and amber and red. Everything beautiful, everything decaying. It was late afternoon when she pulled into the gravel driveway. The house looked the same, but different, as if it had absorbed something dark into its bones. Margaret was on the porch, sitting in the swing. She stood when Emily got out of the car. They didn't hug. "Come inside," Margaret said. Emily followed her in. The house smelled of lavender and wood smoke. It was warm, tidy. Grace wasn't in sight. "She's napping," Margaret said, answering the unspoken question. They sat at the kitchen table. Margaret poured tea. Emily didn't touch hers. "You could have told me," Emily said. "I know. You let me hold that child. You looked me in the eye." "I didn't know how to say it," Margaret interrupted. Her voice was calm but frayed at the edges. "At first, I thought I could keep it buried. I thought, maybe you'd never have to know." Emily let out a sharp, humorless laugh. "Never have to know that my husband, slept with my mother?" Margaret didn't flinch. Emily stood, began pacing. How long? How long were you two?" Margaret took a breath. "It started the summer you all came to visit. After your father's anniversary." Emily turned sharply. "So while I was putting Noah to bed, he was sneaking downstairs to sleep with you?" "No," Margaret said, but it didn't matter. Truth and denial held equal weight now. Emily looked at her, really looked at her. "Did you ever love Dad?" "Of course I did." "Then how could you do this?" "I was lonely, Emily. Not in the way people say when they want attention. I was hollow. And Daniel, he was breaking too. We didn't plan it. We didn't want it. But it happened." Emily crossed her arms. "That's your excuse?" "No. That's my confession." They stood in silence. The clock in the hallway ticked too loudly. Somewhere upstairs, Grace stirred and whimpered, then fell quiet again. Emily sat down again. Her hands were shaking. "I thought you were the one person in the world who would never betray me," she said. "I thought I was too," Margaret whispered. Emily looked down at her hands. "And the baby?" "She's Daniel's. Mine. No one else knows. The town believes what I told them." Emily laughed again, bitter and brittle. "The town thinks you're a hero. I didn't do it to deceive them. I did it to protect her. And to protect you, in a way." Emily's voice rose. "Protect me? From what?" "From the truth you were living every single day while smiling in my face." Margaret looked older in that moment than Emily had ever seen her. Not because of the wrinkles or gray hair, but because of the weight she carried in her silence. "I know I don't deserve forgiveness," she said, "but I needed to say it. Out loud. To you." Emily's eyes burned, but the tears still wouldn't come. "I need to see her," she said. Margaret nodded and led her upstairs. The nursery was soft and gentle. Yellow walls, hand-sewn curtains, a rocking chair in the corner. Grace lay in a crib, cheeks flushed, thumb in her mouth. Emily stood over the crib, staring. She saw it now, the resemblance. Not just to Daniel, but to herself. The eyes. The mouth. She hadn't imagined it. Margaret stood behind her, silent. Emily leaned over and gently brushed a finger along Grace's cheek. The baby stirred but didn't wake. "I should hate her," Emily said. "She didn't ask for any of this," Margaret replied. "I know." They stood in the room for a long time. That night, Emily stayed in her childhood bedroom. She couldn't sleep. The mattress was too soft, the silence too loud. Memories haunted every corner. Her father reading bedtime stories, her mother singing in the kitchen, Daniel laughing in the backyard during their first summer visit. It all felt like a lie now. In the morning, she came downstairs to find Margaret already awake, feeding Grace in the rocking chair. "I'm going back today," Emily said. Margaret nodded. "I don't know what I'm going to do." "I understand. I might leave him." "I won't stop you." Emily looked at her. "And what about you?" Margaret's gaze didn't waver. "I'll raise her. Whatever happens between you and Daniel, she's still mine. I won't abandon her." Emily nodded, slowly. "I don't think I can forgive you. I wouldn't ask you to. But I don't want to be like you," Emily added. "I don't want to live with bitterness pretending to be strength." For the first time, Margaret's eyes filled with tears. She didn't wipe them away. "I never wanted to be the reason you broke," she whispered. Emily turned to leave. Before she reached the door, she said, "One day, when Grace is old enough, you'll have to tell her. Everything. I will. And you'll have to tell her why I'm not in her life." Margaret's voice cracked. "I hope you will be." Emily didn't answer. She closed the door behind her and walked into the pale morning light, where the wind moved through the trees like a warning, and the cracks in everything had finally become impossible to ignore. Daniel knew she had been to Fairview. When Emily returned that evening, her silence wasn't cold. It was precise, like a scalpel. She unpacked her bag methodically, placed Noah's dinner on the table, asked him about school. She laughed when he told her a story about finger painting. She tucked him into bed and kissed his forehead twice instead of once. Daniel watched all of it from the kitchen doorway, waiting for the explosion. But it never came. Not in the way he expected. When Noah was asleep, Emily poured herself a glass of wine. Then another. Then she sat down at the table and looked at Daniel like she was waiting for him to prove he still existed. "I saw her," she said. "He didn't pretend to misunderstand." "I know." I held her. Daniel's throat went dry. "She's beautiful," Emily said. "She has your eyes." My mouth. Daniel sat across from her, his hands folded in front of him. "I never meant for it to happen." Emily laughed. "Do you think that makes it better?" "No." She swirled the wine in her glass. "How many times?" He hesitated. "I don't know." She nodded. "Too many to count. I didn't go looking for it. I didn't plan it. It just happened. The oldest excuse in the world." He looked down. "I know you hate me." "No," she said. "That would be easier. I wish I hated you." They sat in silence for a long time. The refrigerator hummed. A dog barked somewhere down the street. The world outside continued, blissfully unaware of the war being waged in their kitchen. Emily leaned forward. "Did you love her?" Daniel blinked. "I don't know." She raised her voice. "Yes, you do. Did you love her?" He closed his eyes. "Maybe. In the way a drowning man loves the hand that pulls him out of the water." Emily looked away. "And I was the water. You were the life I thought I wanted. She was the life I didn't know I needed." The words hung in the air like smoke. "I gave you everything," Emily whispered. "I know. I trusted you. I didn't deserve it. You slept with my mother, Daniel. You made a child with her." His eyes filled with tears. "I didn't go to her because I didn't love you. I went to her because I didn't know who I was anymore. She saw something in me I thought I'd lost." "And what did you see in her?" He swallowed hard. "The same thing I saw in you when we first met." Emily stood, shaking. "I can't do this." Daniel rose too, quickly. "Please, Emily." "Don't," she snapped. "Don't beg. Don't try to fix it with words. There are no words for this." He stepped back. She walked toward the door, then paused. "I thought about staying. For Noah. For the illusion of stability. But then I realized, if I stay, I'm teaching him that betrayal can be forgiven if it's convenient." Daniel's voice cracked. "So you're leaving?" "I'm taking Noah," she said. "We're going to stay with my friend in Chicago for a while. I need space. I need air." He nodded slowly, as if the world had just dropped out from under him. "Will I see him?" "I don't know yet." She turned to leave again, then stopped once more. "I talked to her," she said, "about what she'll tell Grace when she's older." Daniel looked at her. She said she'd be honest. That she wouldn't lie to her about what happened. She shouldn't. "No," Emily said. "She shouldn't." Then she looked at him one last time. "I hope you never forget what you did. I hope it keeps you up at night. I hope it makes your chest ache for years." He didn't respond. Emily walked out of the kitchen, out of the house, out of their life. Daniel didn't move for a long time. In Fairview, Margaret sat in the nursery, holding Grace against her shoulder. The baby was warm, soft, breathing evenly. Margaret's back ached. Her knees throbbed. But her heart was quiet for the first time in weeks. She had expected Emily's rage. She had even expected Emily's departure. What she hadn't expected was the moment after. After Emily had held Grace. After she'd looked into Margaret's eyes and said, "You broke me." There was no yelling. No slamming of doors. Just the truth, finally spoken. And the unbearable cost of it. Margaret sang softly, a lullaby she used to sing to Emily when she was little. Grace stirred, then settled. Downstairs, the front door opened. Margaret stiffened. Footsteps. Familiar ones. Daniel stepped into the nursery doorway. He looked like he hadn't slept. His eyes were red, his shoulders slumped. "She's gone," he said. Margaret didn't turn. "I know. She took Noah. Said she's going to Chicago. She needs to." Daniel walked into the room, slowly. "I keep trying to figure out the moment I became this man." "There wasn't one moment," Margaret said. "There were hundreds." He looked at Grace. "She's the only good thing that came out of this." Margaret finally turned. "Then don't ruin her with guilt." "I don't know how to live with this," he said. "You will," she replied. "Because you have to." He sat down in the rocking chair beside her. Grace stirred again, her tiny fist curling into Margaret's collar. "Emily asked me to tell her the truth one day," Margaret said. Daniel nodded. "Will you?" "Yes." He reached out, touched Grace's foot lightly. "Do you think she'll hate us?" Margaret looked at him, her expression unreadable. "I think she'll have the right to." The room fell into silence again, but it wasn't the heavy, choking silence of before. It was thinner now, cracked open, like air after a storm. Daniel stood. "I won't come back," he said. "Not unless you need me to." Margaret didn't answer. He took one last look at Grace, then walked out. As his footsteps disappeared down the stairs, Margaret whispered to the sleeping baby, "You won't be like us. I'll make sure of it." Outside, the wind had stilled. The trees were bare now, their branches like fingers reaching towards something that was no longer there. The letter arrived on a Monday. It was addressed to Emily in Margaret's delicate cursive, sealed in a plain white envelope with no return address. It had no stamp. Someone had hand-delivered it. Emily found it waiting on the porch of her friend's house in Chicago, where she and Noah had been staying for nearly 2 months. Snow had started to gather lightly on the steps, and Noah was inside watching cartoons with a mug of hot cocoa. She opened the envelope slowly, already knowing, somehow, what it meant. Inside were 2 pages, folded neatly. No photos. No grand gestures. Just a letter, simple and stark. "Dear Emily, I don't know how to ask for forgiveness, so I won't. I once told Daniel that we were grief in the shape of love. That's still true. But what I never said aloud was that I never stopped loving you, even in the middle of my failure. You were the best thing I ever created. And then I created something else that I shouldn't have. But Grace is not a mistake. The mistake was mine. All mine. I've arranged for her care. You won't need to worry about her. I just couldn't stay. Not after everything. I need to find whatever is left of myself that hasn't been poisoned by this story. If there is such a thing, please tell Grace the truth one day. But don't tell her in anger. Tell her with mercy. Tell her I loved her enough to leave. With all my love. Mom." Emily read it once. Then twice. She didn't cry. Instead, she called Daniel. He answered on the second ring. His voice was tired. Hesitant. "Emily." "She's gone," Emily said. "What?" "She left Grace. She sent me a letter. She's disappeared." Daniel's silence was immediate, heavy. Emily closed her eyes. "She planned it. Arranged care. But she's gone." "Where is Grace now?" "She's in Fairview. With a neighbor, I think. The police found her yesterday, alone in the house. No sign of Margaret. No note. Nothing but this letter." Daniel let out a slow breath. "God, I don't know if she ran," Emily said, her voice shaking. "Or if she wouldn't," Daniel said quickly. "She wouldn't do that. Wouldn't she?" "I don't know," he admitted. There was a long pause between them, like neither wanted to hang up. Like the call was a rope, and letting go meant falling into something neither of them was ready for. "Grace is a ward of the state now," Emily said. "Temporary placement. Unless." Daniel finished the thought. "Unless one of us steps in." Emily didn't respond. The next day, Daniel drove to Fairview. The house was sealed with yellow tape. Not a crime scene, just official language for "don't enter." The neighbors watched him from their windows. A few offered sympathetic glances. Most avoided his eyes. He spoke to the sheriff, who confirmed what Emily had said. Margaret was gone. No signs of foul play. No suicide note. No sightings. Just an empty house, a full fridge, and a baby found crying in the nursery by a neighbor who hadn't seen Margaret in 3 days. Daniel visited Grace at the temporary foster home. She was smaller than he remembered. Her eyes were wide, confused. She didn't cry when she saw him, just stared, silently, like she was already learning how to process abandonment. He held her for the first time in weeks, and something inside him broke open. "I'm sorry," he whispered to her. "I didn't fight for you." The social worker asked if he wanted to begin the process of custody. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he went home and called Emily again. "I saw her," he said. "Grace. She's okay. But she's quiet." Emily was silent for a moment. "She's a baby, Daniel." "No," he said. "She's already learning how to disappear." They didn't speak for a while. Then Emily said, "What are we going to do?" Daniel took a breath. "I'll take her." "You think that fixes anything?" "No. But it's something. You're not in any place to raise a child alone." "I'm the only one left," he said. "Unless you're willing." Emily didn't answer. After a moment, she said, "Let me think about it." 3 weeks passed. Christmas came. The city lit up with garlands and frost. Daniel decorated his apartment with cheap lights and tried to make it look like home. Grace moved in just before New Year's. He signed the paperwork, stood in front of a judge, and promised to provide for her, to raise her, to keep her safe. The judge looked at him for a long moment before stamping the papers. There was a quiet solemnity to the process, like everyone in the room knew what wasn't being said. He brought Grace home and held her in the armchair for hours. He told her about the river, about the porch swing, about a woman who had once sung lullabies with a cracked but beautiful voice. He didn't say her name. That night, Emily called. "How is she?" "Sleeping," Daniel said. "She eats a lot. Cries when I leave the room. She misses her." "I know." There was a pause. "I sent a copy of the letter to the police," Emily said. "They still don't have anything. Not even a bank transaction. It's like she vanished into the wind." She was always better at disappearing than anyone gave her credit for. "Do you think she's alive?" "I don't know," Daniel said. "But I hope she is. Somewhere quiet. Somewhere peaceful." Emily sighed. "Noah asked about her today. About Grace. He wants to know if he has a sister now." "And what did you say?" "I told him the truth." Daniel felt the lump rise in his throat. "Thank you." He asked if she'll live with us one day. Daniel's heart stilled. "And I told him I didn't know." Emily didn't say goodbye this time. She just hung up. Daniel sat in the dark, the baby monitor glowing softly beside him. In the other room, Grace stirred in her crib. She didn't cry, just made a soft, questioning noise, like she was calling out for something she couldn't name. He went to her, picked her up, held her close. "I'm here," he whispered. It was the only promise he could still keep. Spring came slowly to Tennessee that year. The frost withdrew its hold on the windows. The river thawed and began to murmur again. Trees that had stood bare for months began to dress themselves in green. Life, stubborn and relentless, moved forward. Daniel was changing diapers at 2 a.m. now. He could assemble a bottle in the dark, half asleep. Grace's cries no longer startled him. They guided him. Her world was made of simplicity and dependence, and in its own strange way, it was healing him. They had created her out of betrayal. Now she was saving him from it. Every morning, he would walk her along the path behind his apartment complex. She liked the wind, the trees, the sound of passing cars. She'd fall asleep in the carrier strapped to his chest, her head resting just below his heart. He spoke to her often during these walks. About choices, about pain, about rivers. "There's a river inside people," he told her one day. "The one we're afraid to cross. The one where the truth waits on the other side." She gurgled softly, reaching for the cord of his hoodie. "I tried to cross mine too late," he said. "But I'm still walking." He didn't expect forgiveness. Not from Emily. Not from the world. But Grace. Grace was too new to carry judgment. Her love came without history. And somehow, that was enough to keep him moving forward. Emily hadn't come back. But she called more frequently now. Sometimes just to check on Grace. Sometimes to talk about Noah. Sometimes without saying why. One morning in late April, Daniel picked up the phone to find her quiet. "Everything okay?" he asked. "I've been thinking," she said. "About what?" "About Grace. About us." Daniel waited. "I don't think I hate you anymore," she said. He didn't speak. The silence felt like sunlight breaking through cloud. "I don't trust you," she added. "But I don't want this to be what defines us for the rest of our lives." I understand. I don't know what will be, but I want to be in her life. I want Noah to know her. And I want to know her too. Daniel nodded, even though she couldn't see him. She'd want that, even if she doesn't know it yet. Daniel, yeah, I think I'm ready to come home. His breath caught. For me? No, she said gently. For her. He closed his eyes. That's more than I deserve. I'm not doing it for you. He smiled, not out of joy, but out of something quieter. Acceptance. Then come home, he said. 2 weeks later, Emily and Noah moved into a small apartment across town. Not back into the old life, but into something new, carefully constructed, brick by brick. It wasn't a reconciliation, it was a coexistence. They shared responsibilities. They shared time. But they did not share a bed. Not yet. Maybe not ever. But there was no hate between them now. No screaming. Just the hum of two people doing their best. On a Sunday afternoon in May, they all went to the park together. Daniel pushed Grace's stroller while Noah raced ahead, kicking a soccer ball. Emily walked beside him, arms crossed, sunglasses shielding her eyes from the sun and from him. At one point, Grace began to cry, and Emily picked her up without hesitation. She cradled her like she'd done it 1,000 times. Grace quieted instantly. Daniel watched, heart caught somewhere between awe and grief. She knows you, he said. Emily looked down at the baby. She should. I'm her sister's mother. Daniel blinked. Is that how you see it? I don't know yet, she said. But it's not her fault what happened. I can't punish her for being born. They sat on a bench while Noah chased his ball. Grace slept on Emily's chest. Do you think she'll ask one day? Emily said softly. Daniel nodded. They always do. And what will we say? We'll say the truth. Emily looked at him. Even if it breaks her, she deserves the truth before the world gives her a worse version of it. Emily nodded. Then we tell her, when she's old enough. And until then, we raise her. Separately. Together. However we can. He nodded. There were no contracts. No promises. Just the fragile scaffolding of a new foundation. It wouldn't hold much weight yet, but maybe, one day it could. Years passed. Grace grew fast. She had Daniel's quiet curiosity and Emily's fire. She loved rivers. She would sit for hours watching them, silent and still, as if listening to something only she could hear. At age 5, she asked her first hard question. Why don't I have a mommy like Noah does? They had planned for it, practiced the words. But none of that mattered when she was looking at them with wide, honest eyes. Emily knelt down beside her. You do have a mommy. She just couldn't stay. But she loved you. Grace's brow furrowed. Where did she go? Daniel answered. We don't know. But if she's out there, I think she watches the river and thinks about you. Grace nodded slowly, the way children do when they don't fully understand but choose to accept anyway. Okay, she said. And that was all. 10 years after Margaret disappeared, her body was never found. No trace. No sightings. Nothing. But Daniel kept one photo of her tucked into the back of a drawer. The one where she held Grace on the porch, her face unreadable, but whole. The last time she was seen. He never showed Grace that photo. Not yet. But sometimes, on early mornings, he would walk the river trail with her and sit on the bench beneath the sycamore tree. And when she would ask him about the water, he'd tell her, this river is like life. You don't always get to choose which side you start on, but you can always decide how you cross it. She would nod, not quite understanding, and lean her head against his shoulder. And he would close his eyes, holding on to that moment, for all the ones they had lost and all the ones they still had left, because the river they never crossed still ran beside them. And though the bridge had burned long ago, something stronger had begun to take its place. Not perfect, but real, and still moving forward.